read you a story called Big Rock's Cafe. I've had a lot of comment on this one, and this story was prompted by an article I saw in the paper. And it was, I lived in the Norfolk, Virginia area at that time, and it was about this homeless man on the street. And he had been found dead on the street, and they couldn't find anybody who knew who he was. And they were asking, you know, if anyone was missing anybody, please call the police department. And I just thought about that for a long time, and then just like one night, I just was sitting there and kind of half asleep, and all of a sudden this story occurred to me. And I'll read this one for you if you like. The sign said Big Rock's Cafe, and those who didn't know any better, those who were first-timers or who had just stopped in to ask directions, thought it was named for the two 30-pound rocks perched precariously up on a shelf over the outdated cash register. They came from the North Pole. These rocks are always cold, they were told upon inquiry. I carry them in my sea bag all the way. Feel, they're cold just like I told you. Patrons would carefully reach up high to rub the cold, gray hardness and ponder the pink streaks circling the rocks. They were eye-catchers, all right, but actually the cafe was named for Rockford K. Lancaster, the owner, a hulk of a man who stood 6'4" and who was generally known as Big Rock. Just couldn't think of a real name for the place, he would say, by way of explanation. But why don't you put an apostrophe on your sign? Someone once asked him, someone not from the neighborhood. Everybody knows this is Big Rock's place, that I'm Big Rock, he said. And that was that. Big Rock was not a man who was concerned with trifles like apostrophes, and it was true that everybody, at least everybody in Big Rock's world, which was that 6-block area of the city called Pine Ridge, knew who Big Rock was and where his place was. Some said Big Rock had been a cook in the Navy back in World War II, but no one really knew for sure because Big Rock never talked about himself. He spent his days listening to his customers talk about their lives, laughing at their jokes, and patting their backs, literally and figuratively, when they were down on their luck. When the focus turned to Big Rock, when someone asked a question about his life outside the cafe, Big Rock conveniently remembered something that needed doing in the kitchen. Big Rock was comfortable with the man he had become and the life he had made for himself. His days and his customers were predictable, and he liked that. Most of his day customers were people who still worked in the deteriorating neighborhood, whose employers were not prosperous or ambitious enough to move across town. They came in for coffee or cigarettes during the breaks or at lunchtime for soup, and Big Rock's own special sandwiches, so thick they were difficult and often embarrassing to eat if you were concerned about good table manners, which most people were not at Big Rock's Cafe, even the normally well-mannered ones. After 3:30 p.m., the place would be filled with neighborhood children and teens sipping sodas, laughing and talking, some even doing homework in the back booths. They didn't buy much, but Big Rock didn't mind. He knew these kids did not have money, that the only kids who had money in that neighborhood were the ones who got it by, well, Big Rock didn't even want to think about that, much less say it aloud. He only knew that these kids in his place were okay, and if they felt good being there, if they needed a place to hang out away from the other kind, he would see to it they had it. By 5 o'clock, the kids were gone. That was Big Rock's favorite time of the day, when those who lived in the aging, hot and dreary apartment buildings nearby would drop in for refreshment to help them make the daily transition from jobs which bent their backs to the homes which bent their spirits. A few laughs at Big Rock's got most of them in a little bit better frame of mind, though, made it a little easier to face the drabness of home and the never-ending needs of their families, which they just couldn't seem to meet no matter how hard they tried. It was mostly the same crowd, congenial and comfortable, which had become a sort of extended family to each other over the years, and like most families, they had their favorite member, an unkempt, shaggy man known as Yogi Bear Hobson, named for his favorite cartoon character. Big Rock had become quite fond of Yogi over the years. Perhaps it could be said that he even loved Yogi as he would a brother who had fallen short of his goals in life. In fact, everyone seemed to have a special liking for Yogi, though they had long since forgotten his real name, and none of them knew exactly where he lived or worked. He said he painted houses sometimes and did a little carpentry work here and there. Whatever and wherever wherever I could make $1 or $2, Yogi told them, and $1 or $2 was about all Yogi ever seemed to have, but it didn't seem to bother him any. He seemed satisfied to wear the same few clothes day after day, and was never heard to complain or wish for anything that he did not have. Of course, about all anyone could say about his clothes were that they covered him. And Yogi's hair looked so bad that Big Rock brought in a pair of scissors one night and told Yogi he was going to cut that hair. From that time on, Big Rock was Yogi's personal barber, and no one could deny that Yogi's hair did look, well, shorter. Sometimes Big Rock wondered why they all liked Yogi so much. He never smiled, hardly ever talked, and even got downright rude when people got too noisy when he was trying to watch his cartoons. Yet, there was something about Yogi that drew people to him, made them want to do things for him. Maybe it was the lost, distant look in his eyes, or the deep lines covering his face, which spoke of a life that had not been kind, even less kind than their own. Maybe it was the fact that here was somebody with even less than they had, that no matter how hard times got, no matter how empty their wallets were, no matter how little they had or were likely to have, here was somebody who had less. Maybe it wasn't so much that they liked Yogi as it was that they needed him. Over the years, they bought him beers when he was between jobs, shared their cigarettes, and conceded that the seat at the end of the counter nearest the TV was his. When Big Rock saw him coming, he would twist the dial to Yogi's favorite station and would often slip a plate on the counter filled with steaming soup and a roast beef on rye, or a hot dog with chili and onions, Yogi's favorites. "Help me out with this, Yogi. I've overcooked again, and you know I can't stand to waste food," he would say. Sometimes Yogi would protest, being out of work and money, and Big Rock would have to say, "Oh, go ahead, Yogi. You know your credit is good with me." So Yogi, to stop the hunger pains in his belly, would eat the meal in front of him, eyes steady on the hot, steamy food, shoulders hunched in a way that invited no further conversation. In time, though, Yogi began to eat less and less, and Big Rock became worried. "You know," he said one night to some of the crowd, "I think Yogi's sick." It was generally decided that something had to be done. His family located, some medical help found for him, but they weren't sure how to go about it. "I don't even remember his real name," Big Rock said. "I'm not even sure he remembers it. I asked him one day what his real name was, and he just looked at me as if I were crazy, said his name was Yogi, just Yogi." All efforts to obtain information about Yogi's family were futile. "No family," he said, "just me, Yogi." Finally, they gave up trying and assumed the responsibility for Yogi's medical help. A collection was taken up to help Big Rock, who had personally taken Yogi to the doctor, then to the hospital, where it was determined that Yogi had cancer. "It's why he won't eat," Big Rock explained, not really understanding it himself. He took plates to the hospital filled with all the things he knew Yogi liked best, but Yogi just ate less and less and grew thinner and weaker. They all rallied to Yogi, taking turns trying to make him laugh, eat, and talk, but in the end, it was Big Rock who was sitting by his bed and holding his hand when Yogi simply closed his eyes and left Big Rock sitting alone, trembling as the tears rolled down into the heavy scruff of beard. "He died easy," he told the crowd back at the cafe, and they began collecting for Yogi's funeral. Gradually, the jar on the counter filled with the nickels, dimes, quarters, and occasional dollar bills of those who had little but who had more than Yogi ever had. "You'd all do the same for me," one said. "Yogi would have done the same for any of us if he could have," said another, and they all agreed. There was some talk that Yogi's body could be given to the medical school. Others said that the city would bury Yogi, but Big Rock wouldn't hear of it. So Yogi was laid to rest in a nice, dignified gray metal coffin while the Baptist minister said the prayer, asking the Almighty to look after Yogi now that his friends couldn't. There were a few flowers in a green vase beside the grave, pink gladiolas from someone's yard. No one knew who had brought them, and no one asked. Big Rock had trimmed Yogi's hair one last time, and they all agreed that Yogi looked real good laying there. Big Rock left the wreath on the door till it literally fell in shreds one day. He wasn't sure why he had been unable to take it down, and fretted continually that they had not been able to learn more about Yogi, had not been able to notify someone, anyone, who would care that he was gone, someone who had cared and loved a younger, a different Yogi. They managed to get all the bills paid, and none of them thought it at all strange that even in their own lack, Yogi was provided for. And none of them thought it strange when Big Rock removed the stool at the end of the counter. It had, after all, been Yogi's. They often mentioned Yogi, always with a smile, always with affection, and sometimes wondered aloud if there were people elsewhere in the world who were wondering about Yogi, wondering whatever happened to him. Well, Yogi chose to make his way alone, said Big Rock, either by choice or maybe he just didn't have anybody he really thought cared. Big Rock thought about that a long time. It just seemed a shame to die and one's folks not even know. So one night after the customers had all gone home, he opened the cash register, and under the heavy black metal tray, he placed a piece of paper on which he had neatly printed the names and last known addresses of those who had once shared his life. He didn't know if they were still at those addresses, and he did not intend to find out. But time marched on, and Big Rock knew the day would come when his regulars would be glad he had left this scrap of blue-lined paper stained with the grease of his trade. Until then, like Yogi, he chose to walk alone, and it was nobody's business why.